Here is Sailor Studio 150, a purple ink. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink.
The paper I'm using here is a Maruman Mnemosyne Notebook.
I found this very frustrating to use during the day. That makes me less enthused about doing this review, which is why it ended up being so short. There is color variation by pen, as well as tone variation, and yes, it does shade. Now, much of my day was spent with a dry, fine pen on non-fountain pen friendly paper, and I was finding it just too light, to comfortably read. It's why I just skipped all of that in here. It was a constant source of frustration to read what I had written. And, well, it looks much better in the writing sample than it does even here. All of the writing samples are done with a Platinum 3776 with a soft fine nib that writes rather dry. A Hero 7035 with a fine nib that writes wet. A Visconti Van Gogh with a medium nib and an average flow. A Lamy All-Star with a broad nib that writes average.
The pen for today is a Kaweco Sport.
Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how I got there with the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. Looking at the soft fine nib, it is the lightest tone that we're going to get on this paper. Again, it was horrible during the day with all of the non-fountain pen friendly papers. It also shows up more as a blue, a very, very blue leaning purple. Now, it doesn't feather and it doesn't spread. It does shade. It shades incredibly well on this paper. Looking at it, far and away better than I would have expected. Look at far and away on the second line, where the F is quite a bit darker and the R, AR, get lighter. Now, away mostly is a nice lighter tone and the Y darkens up a little bit. This is quite a bit darker than I was experiencing with the non-fountain pen friendly paper. Looking at the wet fine nib, this is the best it's ever gonna look. Spoiler. Beautiful dark purple for what we get from this ink. Nice purple, no feather, no spread. Yes, there's a little bit of tone variation. You can see it in like drought on the second line, where the D is darker than the R and the A darkens up again. The U lightens. The beginning of the G is light, but during the G it gets dark and it keeps that through the HT at the end. Looking at the medium nib, it is a whole lot darker than it was with the wet fine. It's purple, so it's purple again, where it was blue with the soft fine. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it does shade throughout most of this writing. Take a look at through on the first line, where the T is a nice midtone, that HR get very dark, the OU lighten up quite a bit, the G gets to a midtone, the H dark again. I'm going to tell you, if this was what I was really experiencing through the day, I'd been much happier. And I just wasn't willing to do all of the other writing samples with the frustration that I had felt. Looking at the broad nib, it is lighter than it was with the medium. It also is a very blue leaning purple, very blue. You might even mistake it for blue at times. Now, it does not feather and it does not spread. It does shade fairly well. You don't have to look very hard for it. Take a look at sight on the first line, where the S is very light with into the I. The GH become a nice midtone, and that T very dark at the end. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. Like most inks, this one comes in a bottle. This is how the Pilot Custom 823 fits. And here is the Pelikan M1000. Here is the ink level when you can no longer fill a Lamy Safari. There were approximately 9 milliliters of ink left. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is immediately put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. The one on the right, marked with a D, is let dry for 10 minutes before putting into water. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page. and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. The highlighter is on the top left, pen flush is on the top right, 1/3 bleach solution is on the bottom left, and water is on the bottom right. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables.
Here is Judgement Amethyst du Royal 1798. Here is Organic Studios Vanadium.
Here is Sailor Studio 935. Here is Vinta Mulberry Ubi. While it's nice to see ink in the same color family, I prefer to see ink to complement the color on the page.
Here is KWZ Menthol Green. Here is Krishna Pencil. Here is Ackerman Gourmet Pens Pink.
Here is Montagrappa Harry Potter Hufflepuff. So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The paper I'm using here is yellow Rhodia paper.
I'm hoping for some leniency here on all the papers that I skipped because, again, my daily experience was just horrible. Now, the soft fine is light in tone and blue in tone. It does shade, where the wet fine is a beautiful darker purple, at least for what we've seen from this ink. The medium is a lighter purple and shades the best of what's going on. The broad is lighter than the medium and can look a bit blue or purple depending on the light, but it also shades. Let's start with what to avoid. Any medium flow or dry pen, really, I found it more than disappointing. So what to choose? Well, I think the only way to go would be with a very wet pen, probably fine or medium, to make sure you get that darker tone of purple and can easily read it. I hope you got something out of this video, and thanks for watching. I want to let you know that the best way you can support this or any channel is to let retailers know where you heard of something if you go to buy.